Hello, everyone. I'm here today with Richard Nell. He is the author of the Ash and Sand book trilogy. Richard, thanks for joining me today. I appreciate your time.
My pleasure. Glad to be with you.
Yeah, I'm really excited. I wasn't sure if you'd have the time to sit and chat with a random guy on YouTube, but
I always have time for random YouTubers. Actually, I want to get into YouTube. I've got like the green screen. I've got some of the equipment. I just have none of the skill. So I'm gonna have to learn like the software and I don't know how to speak for 5 minutes without stumbling all over myself. But it's fun.
Yeah. Well, I don't have any skill either. I just know I learned how to edit out all the ums and the ahs and the really dumb things I say, which they add up pretty quick.
Well, I'll have to get some tips from you.
Yeah. Yeah. Lots of editing, lots of time in the edit room, editing all that stuff out.
I don't think most people realize how long it takes to do that stuff. You know, how long, they just see a guy sitting in front of a camera for 5, 10, 20 minutes and they think, oh, well, that, didn't take that long. But I don't know. What do you think the time would be? If it's a 10-minute video, how long do you think you'd take to make
it? From start to finish for the whole thing, probably 2.5, 3 hours, maybe.
Yeah.
From start to finish. Okay. Yeah. For the reviews, I try and script them out, and then I have to repeat myself, 20 times with everything I say. So then you have to go back and edit it all out and find the best version of the dumb thing you said, and then use the best. So yeah, it can get a little.
The writing process is exactly the same.
Is it really?
You just find the least shitty thing that you put down that day, and you go with that.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a fake it till you make it kind of situation for me.
Yeah, well, I don't know. I talked to some writers about this, but the impression I get from most writers, and maybe this is true of most artistic people, is that they usually hate everything that they do. Mm-hmm. There's this beautiful moment, and these are not all the time. They're sort of far and few between. But there'll be this glorious moment where you think it's like that when you've had too much to drink, and you think you've just come up with the greatest idea ever known to man. And then, the next day, maybe you ask your friend about it or something, and he's like, no, that was terrible.
Yeah.
But you have that moment where it's just this beautiful, everything's in alignment, and you think you've struck gold. And then you look at it the next day, or you come back and you edit it, and you change it 5 times. But still, you live for those moments because it's just nothing like it.
Yeah. It's one of those natural highs.
Yes.
Yeah, definitely. So I think with everything that's been going on in the world the past year, how has it affected your work schedule? Have your work habits changed a whole lot?
Not really. The thing about being a writer, you're sort of locked in your basement on your own. I mean, we were well prepared for COVID as a profession.
Yeah.
We're already quarantined, and
yeah.
I think to be a writer, you have to be sort of comfortable with that. I don't think there's a ton of like super extroverted writers out there, or if there are, they better be very efficient at sort of producing words and then going out and enjoying people's company, because otherwise you're pretty solitary. So it's affected my family. I've got a wife and a couple of daughters, and so they've been influenced or impacted, and therefore I've been impacted sort of secondhand. But for the most part, I just kind of sit in my basement and I type words, and then I wander out into the world and what the hell's happening around here every couple of months.
What happened? It was fun a few months ago. What's going on?
Yeah, but I will say I don't like, I guess I'm a bit influenced by the culture and the feeling around me, and I can just feel what COVID's doing to the sort of people around me. That normal people are not used to being trapped in their homes. Normal people are not used to wearing masks all the time. So I don't like that aspect of it, so I try and cheer people up.
Yeah. Well, it's Kings of Paradise is definitely a cheery kind of.
All right, maybe not with this particular book.
Yeah.
I don't.
Yeah. It's an escape for sure.
Yes. Well,
Yeah.
and we talk about grimdark, or we talk about. I didn't even know what grimdark was when I started writing King's Paradise. Somebody told me about the genre afterwards, so I didn't think of it that way. I thought of it as just kind of epic fantasy, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
I knew it was dark, but I thought, well, it's kind of Game of Thrones-ish. I'm not pulling my punches. It's more like I'm a history buff, and it's more like real vagaries of history. These difficulties that these characters are going through. But I didn't think of it as grimdark for sure, and ultimately, I don't want to spoil anything, but I don't write hopelessness.
Yeah.
So even if it feels dark, it's always darkest before the dawn. There's always hope. There's always redemption. So yeah, my favorite books are always kind of bittersweet.
Yeah.
Like you get to the end and somebody's going to have triumphed, but there'll be casualties. There'll be, of course, that's life.
Yeah. It's funny you mentioned grimdark, because I didn't know that there was such a. Some people have this negative reaction to the term grimdark. Does that? What is that term? Is that something that you? I was surprised to see that.
Yeah, well, it's a good question. It might be a terrible marketing strategy, or it might be brilliant. I'm not. As I say, I didn't know it existed, but then people started telling me that that's what I'd written, and I thought, well, maybe having genre is better than not having genre. I don't write to genre. I don't like genre particularly. I understand its function, it's useful, and it's especially for marketing purposes. But the people who say, I want a book, an urban fantasy with a red bicycle and a protagonist who grew up in the Bronx and I don't like when people get that specific. I don't think that's what good art and story is about. You should just sort of go into a thing and see what happens. A good story can come out of anything, so you shouldn't bind yourself by specific genre, if that makes sense. So I don't think that way. But it's also, so that's good in some way, but it's also bad when you're trying to sell, so what's your book about? What genre is it in? And you think, several? What part of the book? It's a big book, and it's a big trilogy, and there's a lot going on. And so, you're always trying to sum these things down into quick explanations. I find that actually guys like you, reviewers, bloggers, you can usually sum up my book better than I can. For whatever reason, maybe it's just a distance thing, but I've heard some people do it in ways where I'm thinking, yeah, that's not bad. Or they'll come up a character, and I'm thinking that is also not bad. What's the best one I heard was someone was talking about Ruka, who's sort of one of the main dark characters of the book, who's sort of a survivalist and an outcast and a cannibal and a variety of other things. Someone called him Conan the Barbarian meets Hannibal Lecter.
Wow, that's a good one.
Isn't that good?
Yeah, that's a good one.
I could have spent 6 months trying to come up with something. I could have done that.
Oh, that is. I like that. That's really good.
I've heard Carl Panzram, who's an American serial killer. Someone called him Carl Panzram meets Isaac Newton or something like that. I don't know. It's just awesome.
That's awesome. Yeah, I'm not that bright to come up with stuff like that. But
no, neither am I.
Yeah. So I noticed on your website that you have a blurb on there that in 2014 you quit your job to pursue writing. What was that like? Was that something that you'd been thinking about doing, or what was that leap of faith? What was that, nerve-wracking or?
Yeah, well, I'll give you the abridged version, but I always wanted to be a writer. I kind of knew that pretty young. I don't know how young. And I just sort of thought, well, I need experience. I need life experience before I can really write anything that's worth a damn. I'm gonna, if I can remember this anecdote correctly, but there's another indie writer. He used to be indie, now he's published, named Josiah Bancroft. He wrote the Books of Babel. When he was young, he was writing quite a lot, and he sent in some short stories or something like that to the BBC. And they sent him a reply eventually that said, "We here at the BBC feel you should live more and write less."
Wow.
Yes. And so I sort of understood that implicitly for myself. I knew that when I was younger, I could maybe write something clever, but it was still not worth a damn. You gotta know something about life to really write a story that anyone cares about, at least in my opinion. So I went out to get experience. And I went to university and I worked jobs, blue collar jobs. When I was young, I built patios and I worked in factories and I did all kinds of things. And then I got my degree and I tried to work in sort of journalism, let's say that kind of area for a while. But eventually, just through almost pure luck, I got a job in an insurance company. It was a proper job where I, had a paycheck bigger than I could possibly have imagined at the time, and had actual responsibility, which was terrifying, and all kinds of things. So I worked in it was a government-owned insurance company. I live in Canada here, and we call it Crown companies. Anyway, so I did that for a number of years, and then I sort of saw the arc of my future. I could just sort of stay with this. You know what I mean? Like I could just work in an office forever, and it just horrified me so much that I basically just quit my job within the next couple of months. And I don't have any bad habits, particularly spending wise, so I was able to save quite a bit of money. And I just thought, well, to hell with it, with no real indication that this was a good idea from anyone. There was nobody saying, "Oh, I can't wait to nonsense." Or Richard, no. So I just did it, and I sort of told my wife that I was going to do it, and she's pretty practical. She's from the Philippines, so she was kind of horrified, I think, but she just thought, well, he's going to do it. There's not that much I can do about it, and so I did. And I sat at home for the next, I want to say 2 years, writing without actually releasing anything, and at the end of that was Kings of Paradise.
Wow.
And so it didn't start out nearly as, I don't know, well-formed as that. Originally I just had the idea of two cultures, very different cultures that didn't know about each other, that mixed, that find one another, and then they come together with all the ramifications that usually happen when these things happen in real life.
Yeah.
So that was it. That was my only. So from that came, Ruka from one culture and Kale from the other culture. And, they just kind of built themselves up. And then after that, I guess I'm more of a character-driven writer, because it became more about the characters at that point than the cultures, let's say.
Yeah.
And all I knew is that ultimately I wanted a clash. I wanted these two cultures and these two characters to just build up and these sort of coming-of-age stories until eventually there's going to be a smash in the middle, and God only knows what will come out of it.
So when you sat down to start writing Kings of Paradise, did you know what the end point was going to be, or do you usually know how a story is going to end, or do you kind of just let it take its own life of its own?
At some point, yeah. So pretty early on, I figure out an ending. Yes, but I should say I come out with an ending to the whole story. So I knew the ending of the third book before I was finished the first book.
Oh wow!
So I didn't think of it as. And I guess there's different ways to do series, right? Some people, they do almost like episodic. They do one story, they wrap up the story in a book, and then at the end of the book, but then, and then there's a new story.
Yeah.
I don't really think that way. I thought of it as one story in 3 parts, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
So even though there are climaxes and, there's things that rise and fall in King's Paradise, I knew that the ultimate story would not end until the end of the third book. I don't want to spoil anything, but I also tried to get clever, so you've read book 1.
Yeah.
And I get this comment a lot, and I think you also pointed it out, that the last, 10, 20% of the book seems to move pretty quick. So I'll just say there's a reason for that.
Yeah.
And that I'm not skipping anything. It's that you will see it in the future.
Yeah.
And so there's, I'll try to avoid exactly, but there's a segment of time, let's say, that you jump in the first book.
Yeah.
That you get into in the second book.
Oh, okay.
So that's how the second book starts. Is you'll jump into that segment of time.
So as a new writer, and you're setting out to write Kings of Paradise, was there any hesitation to write a story so unforgiving and violent? Did that ever give you pause to say, maybe I should go with something a little softer?
No, I'm not at all smart about marketing. I'm not smart. It literally was not in my mind like that. I'm going to write to the correct genre and I'm going to sell 1 million books. And I'm thinking more that way now, to be honest.
Mm-hmm.
I'm starting to think, well, I should probably branch out and I should be a bit more careful about how I do this. But at the time, it literally was just, I'm going to make what I want to make, and I don't care. And honestly, I thought I pulled my punches a little bit. So that should tell you a little bit of how the inner mind works. But as I say, I love history, and history. There's nothing more grimdark than actual history.
No, there's not.
And so no matter what you think of what these characters go through in these books, real people have gone through worse.
Yeah, it's true. Yeah.
And it's funny because these days we're so comfortable. We live in a world we don't even understand how many walls of protection are around us, and how fortunate we are, and how, even though people complain all the time about how difficult life is, no, it's not. It's, we've got refrigeration, we've got power plant, electricity, and clean water. I mean, just that alone, people
on
have
demand.
And so, there's misconceptions. Or not misconceptions. There's beliefs about what dark actually looks like that I sort of don't share, just because maybe I know a bit more about history than the average person. And so I'm comparing my book to that, as opposed to my book to modern life, which is a very small slice of human history, and it's a miracle that we sort of take for granted.
So was there any specific real life events in history that you researched while you were writing the book, and you kind of referenced, or you kind of took pieces from?
Yeah, for sure. So that's always my starting point. When I write books, is I steal and I mix and match, and I from the real bits and pieces of history. So some of the names even you can find in different places. So there's a lot of Southeast Asian background drawn for the islanders and the continent. So Sri Khan, for example, that might ring a bell. It sounds quite a bit like Sri Lanka, or so there is even actually city-states that existed in Southeast Asia called the Pew, the Pew city-states. So I sort of stole that, and I took some of their culture and and then I mixed it with sort of Polynesian. So you've got the mythology and the religion is more Polynesian, like Rangi, Roa. Some of the gods are actually Polynesian gods, with a bit of a twist, let's put it. So I think, that's very common in fantasy. Most people don't realize how common it is. Even Lord of the Rings, let's say, like Middle Earth. Middle Earth is literally translated from Middenheim, which was the Norse sort of what they called Earth. And the reason that they called it Middle Earth was because they believed in a great tree, essentially, that was the universe. And that on the branches of the tree there were worlds, and in the middle of the tree that's our Earth, Middenheim, Middle Earth. And so Tolkien stole all kinds of stuff from Norse mythology and Anglo-Saxon mythology. So I've done something similar. And actually, I took my own little. I stole my own version from the Norse. So there's the Southeast Asian culture, and then there's the Men of Ash. And the reason I call them the Men of Ash is because, again, that is literally pulled right from the Danish. I think called themselves the Asko Mani, which is literally translated as the men of the ash tree, because they thought that the tree that held all the worlds was an ash tree. So literally, they called themselves the Men of Ash. I did the same thing, but of course, I have mine erupting out of a volcano. I think that's the mythology.
Yeah. Wow. I didn't know any of that. That's really interesting.
Yeah, there's lots of little things like that.
Yeah.
So I could go on, I'm sure, but I don't want to bore people. I'm always,
No.
I try and realize I like these things a lot more than normal people. And so I'll spend my time like researching the etymology of some obscure fact, but you've got to be careful not to put too much of that into a book because you just interrupt the pace and the plot, and most people don't care, you know.
Yeah. Well, I think it's really. I think most book readers would be interested to hear that kind of thing. I think that's really interesting. I didn't realize any of that. So
Yeah.
I look at the world and at Kings of Paradise in a different way. I was curious with the gods in the Kings of Paradise. Did you have all that planned out, or did you go with it? And
No. So yeah, the cultures I built up just sort of slowly, and I wasn't sure what I wanted to do. I kind of thought I came up with Ruka's culture kind of first.
Mhm.
I wanted these sort of raiders. I wanted a tough, brutal, sort of out of the deserts or out of the mountains or out of the steppe, or some kind of a harsh warrior culture. I knew I wanted that, and to juxtapose that against a much more civilized, richer, urban sort of culture, more like ours, let's say, where the people are quite comfortable and rich. And so I wanted to do that Norse culture, but it's done so many times and in so many ways. I wanted to give it a spin. And so I actually this is something that you don't see too often, is sort of a more matriarchal society. There aren't that many in human history, but there are a couple. And I actually used a real one that, again, is in Southeast Asia, to give some of my, let's say, cultural rules in terms of how these people operate. And actually, these people are still around today, though they're not particularly matriarchal anymore. They've converted largely to Islam, which is, of course, much more patriarchal. And so they've changed their habits, but they still have a couple of the old remnants. And I think there was even a fairly famous man. I think he was a prime minister of like Indonesia, or I can't remember which country it was now, but was a member of this group. The Minangkabau is what they're called, or the people of the victorious buffalo, I think is what it's directly translated to. And one of their big things is that their women inherit. So it's the women who own the property. And so now the men still farm, the men still are chiefs, the men still fight, but they do everything on behalf of their wives and their mothers. And so for the farms, rather than the sons who work the land, let's say, the sons are kicked out essentially. And it will be the women's husbands who are the farmers and who manage the land. But nonetheless, everything is owned by the wife.
Oh.
Now, this is complicated, and it's got pros and cons, because these men, let's call them very diasporic. In other words, they travel, because if you're a son in this culture, you're kicked out of the house as soon as you come of age, and you have to go off and make your way in the world and become useful, and then eventually you come back and you marry the richest woman you possibly can, and move on to her land, basically. So I wanted to incorporate that into this sort of tough warrior culture and just see what the hell would happen. And I don't know, it worked out kind of interesting, I would say.
Yeah.
And I guess readers can decide that for themselves. But for me, it was very interesting to try and figure out how would it work. And even with the actual culture, especially these Minangkabau, and this is true of our culture, when we think of a patriarchal culture and we think of, the women are being controlled, that's never true. Women are mothers and they're daughters, and if you think that the women of these societies have no power, you're out of your mind. Just as if you think if these men who live in a society where the women are in charge, they have no power, you're crazy. Of course they do.
Yeah. I'm curious when you, especially in your first book, but even now on the other books that you've written, when you finish your book and you are set to release it, what is that feeling like? Is it a weird feeling to know that your book, or what you've worked so hard on, is going to be out in the world, and you're going to hear good and you're going to hear bad? That
is actually the terrifying moment. Well, So it's somewhat different when it's indie versus traditionally published.
Mhm.
And I can't tell you what it's like for the traditionally guys, other than I've talked to a few, and I think they're actually more terrified than we are, because when they fail in public, you
Yeah.
know, because there's sort of a moment where the publishers are all pushing them. They have their release dates, everything is happening. But if they sell 2,000 copies and it's a giant flop, they're not just letting themselves down. They're letting down everybody associated with the book, and so it can be a real disaster for them. And if they fail badly enough, they may never get another publishing deal.
Hmm.
Whereas in my world, nobody really cared if I failed, and there's a certain freedom to that. And so I released the book, and I think it was 2017, and nobody bought it. It was, I don't know how many months it was before anybody paid any attention to me, but I wasn't really worried about that. I knew I had to get reviews. I knew I had to get people. So I wasn't thinking that I was going to put the book out and it was going to become a bestseller and I was going to make $1 million. That didn't even enter into my mind. Maybe I started doing this too old. If I was young, maybe I would have thought that. But I've been around too long. I know that's not how the world works. And so I got some reviews, and eventually I got lucky, and someone with a bit more of an audience agreed to read the book and really loved it. And so then suddenly you spike 500 people want to read the book on Goodreads. And once that happens, then you've got a little momentum. And maybe if that reviewer liked it, then the next reviewer might like it. They're willing to take a chance.
Yeah.
So it's that, sort of old 0 to 1 in the business, right? When you're at 0, it's really hard to make any progress whatsoever. So that's the most difficult stage for any writer in any business, anyone in the world, really. When you're at that 0 stage, it's just impossible to get some. But if you can get that, if you can get that momentum, and that's why it's so important one way that people do this is they try and build relationships, right? So if a guy like you is trying to write a book in the future, and you give an interview to a guy like me, and you say, hey, do you remember that time I gave that interview? Would you be willing to read my book? And I say, sure. And if I love it, or I don't have very many morals and I agree to push it anyways, then you say, okay, great, and you can use that little bit of momentum, and you can go from there. So it's one part luck, and it's one part just getting the right people to read the book, and it's one part actually writing a book that is not a piece of shit. So you have to do that. You have to be able to produce a book that someone's going to really like. It doesn't have to be everyone, but it's got to be someone.
So I know a little bit about publishing. Obviously, from the outside looking at it, I just know a little bit. What have been your experiences in trying to get your work published? Is that
zero? I haven't.
Really? You haven't?
Yeah, I never even. Basically, I thought, well, I'm stubborn, and I don't like to ask anybody for permission, and I don't like to wait, and I just thought I'd do it on my own. I thought, Amazon exists.
Uh-huh.
Why do I need to? I could see that it was a huge market. I knew that it was eating up all this market share. So I just thought, well, why wouldn't I just go that route? If I can get into, I went to a cover artist, I went to an editor, I went to the same people that you'd go to if you work for a traditionally published company. And so it takes more work, and it takes more all kinds of little details that I don't really like. So that part of it's really annoying for me. But you can do it, and no one will stop you. So why not just do it? Why would you wait and ask some publishing company that is getting all these, people sending their books to them and begging them to publish it, and you go through the slush piles, and you got to be wildly lucky that you just land on the right desk at the right time, and I don't know. So I think the way to go forward for most writers is a hybrid model. I think you want to get published if you can with a traditional publisher, and maybe at some point I'll try and do this. And you want to go on your own, and you want to know how to go on your own. You want to know how to do everything so that nobody can sort of hold it over you, that you are at their mercy. You want to have, just like any business relationship, you want to have as much leverage as you can possibly have. So You want the ability to go independent whenever you want, however you want, which means you need to start building your own fan base and your own platforms and all that stuff in your own. But that's no reason. There's no reason to stop you from going with a traditional publisher if you want, especially for certain genres and certain books. If you know what they want and if you can produce that, I think that's great. I think the urban fantasy guys in particular, the young adult, with a traditional publisher, that's the way to go, I think.
Yeah. I was curious, and I don't know how much you could tell us about this, but if you look on, it's funny you mentioned Amazon, and there's so many books that are available as Kindle Unlimited. So if you have a Kindle subscription, you can go and get the book. How does that work for you as the author when someone reads your book from Amazon via Kindle Unlimited?
Right. So that's a big reason for an independent writer to use Amazon. It's a very good system for us, particularly for someone like me who writes big books, because how Kindle Unlimited works is you get page reads. So I think, let's say 600 pages is King's Paradise or so.
Yeah. If
you read those 600 pages, I get paid based on how many pages you read.
Wow. I didn't know that.
Yeah, so it doesn't matter. I could set the book at $2.99 or I could set the book at $9.99. That's irrelevant to Kindle Unlimited. All they care about is how many pages did somebody read. So in my case, I think I make about $4.50 for someone to read through the entire book. Now, depending on how much you know about publishing, that might sound like a little or like a lot. It is a lot.
Oh, okay.
If I sell a book traditionally published, more or less on a sale, an author makes $1. So if I make $4, if you read through the book on Kindle Unlimited, obviously I'm doing a lot better. The difference is, I don't have a publisher helping me sell my book in bookstores and all the rest of it. So it's much, much harder to get sales. But I get more money than a traditionally published author every time I make a sale, or if you read through the book on Kindle Unlimited. No question.
Wow. So it's funny because I always try and buy the paper copies of books, thinking that I'm helping because I'm buying the paper copy.
Right.
And it's funny that now that I know about it, I didn't realize that's how it worked. I always wondered what kind of return you had as an author so now that's surprising.
Yeah. Well, I can tell you. So for an ebook, there's some complexity because it depends if you go exclusively with Amazon or whether you don't go exclusively with Amazon. You can go through there's a variety of other markets that you can use, but they will punish you, they will reward you if you go exclusively through them. So they've got their ways to capture you in their own market, and they do that through how much of a percentage you get on the sale, and you get a boost in the algorithm, sort of, right?
Oh.
If you're specifically with them, you're promoted a little bit more. They may not exactly say that explicitly, but that is the truth.
Oh, of course, yeah.
Yeah, and so the percentage, I think it's 20. What is it now? I better get this right. It's 70%. You get 70% if you're exclusive. I can't remember what it is now if you're not exclusive. It's like 40 or 50%.
Wow.
That's
a big difference.
Oh yeah. So that's how they've got the biggest market. So they've got you over a barrel a little bit, and they know it. And it's especially bad with Audible. They also Amazon is also Audible, in case people didn't know that.
Yeah.
With Audible, it's even worse. They'll give you 40% if you go exclusive with them. Only 40%, and they'll give you 25% if you don't go exclusively with them.
Wow.
So think about that. You've written a book. Let's say you've paid a narrator, entirely on your own. You've completely produced the product. All you're doing is giving the product to Audible, and they take 75%.
Wow.
Isn't that amazing?
That is amazing.
Don't you wish you had that kind of power? Yeah.
And so it seems like it's. I'm sure they have more power now with the pandemic, and bookstores are closed. Like in my area, I can't even walk into a bookstore. I have to do everything online, and I can't just walk into one. So, we've been ordering a lot of books on Amazon, so I'm sure they've seen record profits this last year. So
They
I'm
have
sure
been
that's
winning more.
worse.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. They've been eating many of the traditional publishers' lunch for quite a long time. And I don't really see the trend reversing. I don't think the traditional publisher is going to die out or anything like that. There's always going to be space for that. But whatever their market share is in the end, it's going to be pretty low. I don't know. What happens to them if Stephen King goes independent? Right?
Yeah.
And James Patterson and J.K. Rowling. What does J.K. Rowling need a publisher for at this point? Why can't she have her own website? She can have her own everything.
Yeah.
So,
wow.
It's the guys like me, and that's a problem for me too. By the way, I don't want J.K. Rowling to go on her own because then I'm in more direct competition with her.
Yeah, and she'll draw eyes away from Amazon, where you might be promoted and someone else might learn about your book.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So it's an interesting market. It's, sort of we're in the Wild West. Technology has disrupted this industry so much, for good or ill. There's pros and cons to all of it.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of crap out there, right? In the indie market, there's just tons of crap, and nobody in the indie market likes to say that because they don't want themselves to be painted with that brush. But it's absolutely the case. So what the readers really need, and what a good writer really wants, is for them to be able to discern. We need ways to cull the crap and let the cream sort of rise to the top. I'm using multiple metaphors here. We need new ways of discerning, of sort of curation. I don't know what to call it.
Wow, that's really interesting. Is there room for anyone else to come in and if someone came in with I'm sure I'm surprised no one's come in and tried to challenge Amazon and just focus on books and have a website that has.
Yeah, well, and they, Amazon, again, they own the whole world. They own Goodreads, right?
Yeah.
So Goodreads is a version of that. So we need more things like Goodreads, or maybe just, but better software. I'm not sure what the solution is, but I don't know if you play video games or but there's a platform called Steam.
Yeah.
That is sort of like that. It's a little bit like Amazon and a little bit like Goodreads all in one, where they've got multiple methods for people to rate the game, and so you get the scores, but it's much more. There's more detail. It's not like a book where you just say 5 stars or 4 stars. You get more in depth. Like how many people liked it within the last 6 months, or so we need much more data for the consumers to rate books and to talk about the books in a way that, for me as a consumer, I can I want this too. It's not just as a writer. I read a lot of books. I would like to be able to spend as little time possible going through this filtration system and figuring out how to separate the wheat from the chaff.
Oh.
So we need more of that for sure.
So I did notice also on your website that you review books. So people can submit their work for you to read and review, and to give them feedback. What kind of books do you like to read? Just on your own, or whether it's reviews or just in your own free time?
Yeah, well, so I should probably take that down because I don't really do it much anymore.
Oh, okay.
I used to do it, and I stopped largely because I didn't find it very collegial. I don't want to lie. I'm not going to tell my readers I liked something when I didn't. And so if I read somebody's book and I didn't like it, and they're, especially if they're small indie writer or something, I don't want to sabotage them. I'm not trying to hurt anybody from making their living, or especially because I know how hard it is. So I'm not going to give somebody a bad review. So it just became kind of a waste of my time. But I'm happy to push a book that I really like. I'm happy to do that. But on my own time, especially fantasy, one problem with this profession I have unfortunately discovered is that I used to love reading fantasy, and now it's kind of work. I'm either judging it harshly in a sort of critical way. In other words, I'm trying to steal, how did he do this? Or I'm reading it very slowly and carefully, and I'm trying to learn from it. So that's not how you read for pleasure. you read for pleasure. You don't want to realize you're reading a book. You know what I mean? You want to just be lost in the story and go along. So what I do is I just read other genres. I read history, like historical fiction. I read horror. I read crime. I read anything and everything. But my favorite genre for sure is historical fiction. Yeah. And I just finished. I'm trying to think. The Khan Gulden series, the Mongol Empire, I think it's called. I'm not sure if that's the exact title, but it's about the rise of Genghis Khan and his sons.
Are there any authors that you follow and you're always eager to read their work if they release a book?
Yes and no. I'm pretty mercurial, which is a nice way of saying I have a short attention span. So I'm always on to the next thing. And whatever strikes my fancy, I'm really excited about it, and then I forget about it in a week.
Yeah.
But again, most of my favorite writers have been historical fiction writers. But like I love George Martin. I love Mark Lawrence. I was a huge Gemmell fan. I've liked all the, I like Salvatore. I'm not sure how to say his name. I like all the fantasy greats, basically. But again, I truly have, unfortunately, lost some pleasure reading fantasy. I imagine this is true, whatever your specialty is in life.
Yeah.
It becomes your, you know too much. You see the threads, you see the sausage being made, and it's just, there's something ruined about it. Whereas I can still listen to music, and I'm ignorant enough about music that I don't think about it. I just listen to it. I just enjoy it. I don't have to think like, oh, what do you do with that arpeggio there? Oh, what's the, I don't have to worry about it.
Yeah. So it's an escape, and not, I think you start to associate it with work when it's just should be.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Get away with. You mentioned there being a lot of chaff, a lot of books that just aren't very good. With the last, 10 years or so, with a lot of fantasy material being adapted, do you think that's part of it? That a lot of people are trying to capitalize on all these books and everything being adapted into movies and TV shows?
Yeah, it could be. I mean, it's probably multiple reasons. But one of the main reasons is that the barrier to entry, my story, for example, nobody stopped me. I could, some idiot like me can just write a book, go to Amazon, publish the book, and there's nothing to stop you. And so now as a reader, you're clicking through, I'm trying to find a fantasy book, and you find some idiot who can hardly speak the language or something and trying to tell a story. So there you have it. So that's one major problem.
Mm.
Then from the more traditionally published side, it's sort of like, journalism. I don't think, without trying to get into politics, I think a normal person would be perfectly happy to say that the profession of journalism is not what it used to be.
Yeah.
So same sort of issues is happening in the book business because they're being eroded, right? They're in a battle for their life. And so what do you do in that model? Well, one of the things that you give up is really seeking new talent and doing what you can to win that talent and to support it and to build it up. They don't have the time and they don't have the money to do that anymore. So how are they going to find the next Stephen Kings, the next J.K. Rowlings? The next J.K. Rowling is probably going to publish themselves independently, right? That is the problem that the big publishers have. Let's, whether you use myself as an example or not, but you can use some other great indie writers that are still indie writers. Maybe Will White is a good example. The Cradle series, I don't know if you know.
I haven't heard of that.
So this guy has sold, I don't know how many books, but on Goodreads, he's got like hundreds of thousands of reviews.
Wow.
Okay. So as a general rule, you sell, I don't know, at least 10 times as many books as you've got reviews on Goodreads. So this guy has sold millions of books. He's sold probably hundreds of thousands of audiobooks. Why hasn't a traditional publisher snapped this guy up? I mean, it makes no sense, right? I mean,
Yeah.
it just makes no sense. So that is a really bad sign for them. It tells you that they're an industry that's in crisis. Let's put it that way.
Yeah.
And then partially there is some truth to what you're saying in that, once it becomes a fad or, everybody's like, oh my God, Game of Thrones made all this money, let's make the next Game of Thrones. You've got a bunch of idiots who are not passionate about it, who don't know what they're doing, who are all trying to make clones. It's a little bit like, Star Wars, right?
Yeah.
Star Wars, it created a whole new genre, and it took quite a bit of time for that genre to actually develop itself into really good series that deserve to be there, because at first you just got crap that was trying to follow it, and like just trying to pick up some of the pieces of copper lying around, but that's not how great art is made, right?
Yeah, exactly. Well, I was curious, have you been approached about adapting any of your books?
Once I was approached, yes, but in the film business, not that I understand it at all. Mm-hmm. One thing I do understand, mostly because I was approached and I'm thinking, oh God, what do I do? How does this work? They will option a book. So what they do is they pay you a little bit of money, and they say you are not allowed to sell this book to anyone else without coming to us first. That's all that means.
Okay. So you're locked in other words, right?
Well, you're not locked in. All it means is you have to at least give them the chance.
Okay. Is there a time limit on that, or?
And they'll stick a time limit on it. So they'll option it for a year, 2 years, whatever.
Oh, okay.
So that's sort of what happened to me. Some group came along and said, hey, we'd like to option it for a very small amount of money. I'm just some guy, right? And then I never heard from them again. And that's the typical experience, Well, and so you might get optioned. The time will run out. They may even option you again. The time will run out. And there's all kinds of machinations that are going on in the film business where they're pitching different ideas, or, they've got all kinds of things that are pulling and pushing on why they'll do this or why they won't do that. And even, you can go through about 2 or 3 steps beyond the step that I was in, and you're still, doesn't mean you're going to get something made. So they'll option it. Maybe they'll say, okay, we want to buy the rights. They buy the rights. Maybe they sit on the rights for years. Who knows? Maybe they go from that to even saying, okay, we've decided to maybe put this into something approaching production. And then they change their mind, and it doesn't. So many writers have been in the situation where they think, oh my God, somebody's making a movie of my book. And it's like, you're not even close. You have no idea how difficult it is to go from somebody said, sure, let's think about that, to it's actually in the, some executive producer studio, and he's saying, all right, I'm passionate about it. Let's do it.
As you were telling me that, I was curious. I wonder if studios or these production companies or whoever it is that option books, do they option books and material just so no one else can, even if they have no desire to ever do anything with it?
It could be. I mean, I just don't know. I don't know the industry. It wouldn't surprise me if some of that goes on, but I think that these film studios, they've got assistants making 100 calls a day.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? They've always got their feelers out, trying to look for the next big thing and what would make sense. So that's just part of their industry, and they don't take it seriously. So when you get a phone call from some producer's assistant thinking, oh my God, it's my big break, it's like, no, it's not. That is a tiny little baby step on the massive route to
Oh, wow. When you're working on one of your books, do you have someone in your life that you bounce ideas off of, that you have read your book and kind of get feedback from them?
Yeah, I try. It's tough. It is a very solitary profession. At the end of the day, you really want to do that if you can. If you've got people who are fantasy readers in your life, people who you can trust to tell you the truth, or at least that you can trust to have an authentic opinion, But I think this was Neil Gaiman who said this, but you're saying when you give your book to beta readers or whoever, when they say something's wrong, they're almost always right. But when they tell you how to fix it, they're always wrong.
Yeah.
So you need to take what people tell you with a grain of salt, but you do need to take it seriously. So if you've got 5 people who are all saying sort of the same thing, like, I didn't like this character, I didn't like this scene, or I don't understand what's happening. You need to think about that. But usually when they tell you, you should do X, Y, Z to fix it, it doesn't work because they don't understand, why maybe you had a thing done that way or why it connects to 10 other things that you're trying to set. But so you're going to have to fix it. Mm-hmm. But I do find beta readers useful. But usually I have a pretty polished draft. Mm-hmm. I'll go through 2 drafts before I give the book to a beta reader.
Oh, wow.
Sorry, go ahead.
No, I was just going to add, I'm sure you've noticed too on social media, there's a big group of people that I guess they call themselves like the writing community. What piece of advice would you give someone who wants to become a writer, who's an aspiring writer? What advice would you give to them? What to kind of avoid or what to focus on?
I mean, that's tough. I guess you could separate it into 2 parts, right? There's the art piece and then there's the marketing piece.
Yeah.
And I won't say I'm an expert on the art piece, but I like to think I'm better at that part of it. So I guess let me ask you this: which piece do you think is more valuable to talk about?
I would maybe think the marketing side.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
So we touched on this a little bit, I think, back when I was talking about going from sort of 0 to 1, right? I mean, you have to get someone to read your book. This is I think it was a Stephen Pressfield quote. No one wants to read your nonsense. That's understand that. That should be your baseline understanding of the world. It's not that they don't like you. It's nothing like that. They've got 50 million things to think about. They're thinking about their girlfriend and they're losing their job and, the 10 people they've already promised to do a review for. They're already feeling overwhelmed. They don't have the time. They don't have anything. So anything you can do to make it a little easier for them. So do your research on a reviewer, let's say. Figure out what kind of books they like. Figure out how overwhelmed they are. And then slowly, gently, politely try and say, here are the reasons I think you might like to read this book. Don't pressure them. Don't give them a time. Don't say, I need this done by 2 months from now because I'm releasing this. They don't care and they don't like you as soon as you say that. So don't do that. Just be very nice, be very pleasant, especially with reviewers and bloggers. But then you can also approach writers. Writers are actually maybe even a better to approach because they don't get 1,000 emails a day from idiots just like you saying, hey, read my book. It's special, I promise. But you need to go to writers that are not huge. You try and find people in a similar situation to you or a little above. If you've got 10 reviews, ask a guy with 50 reviews to look at your book. Just try and stay within your wheelhouse a little bit. And then you can try and build personal relationships with people.
Yeah.
But be authentic. Don't be trying to weasel your way into things. People can always sniff you out. You've got to be authentic in whatever you're doing. And if that means you have to avoid certain social media, like for me, I'm on Twitter, but I almost never tweet.
Yeah. It's a landmine. It's a field full of landmines.
Well, I find I have almost nothing that I want to say in 140 characters and a meme. I'm just not that guy. Okay, but there are guys who are really good at meming and posting quick little short, abrupt messages and getting people to lol and whatever it is you do on the internet. So there's people who are good at that, and if you're good at that, great. That's your make use of that. So whereas I'm more of I like Reddit a little bit more, where it's more in depth.
Yeah.
People can post longer messages and go back and forth. So I like that a bit more. Honestly, I'm not a huge social media guy anyways. I wouldn't have it. I've got a flip phone, for God's sakes. I don't even have a smartphone.
Yeah.
So just my advice is find your wheelhouse. Find what you are good at to so that you can be authentic on that platform and then use it to make connections with people and try and get them to read your stuff. But long before you get there, you have to believe that what you're doing is actually worth their time. If that makes sense.
Yeah.
It's going to help you a great deal to pitch your book, whatever it is you do in life, if you actually believe in it. If you're just thinking, I have produced a mediocre but salvageable version of an urban fantasy book. If that's how you think about your book, bugger off. We don't need you.
Yeah.
The world's better without one more mediocre urban fantasy book. All right. If you're just trying to make a quick buck, I'm not interested in you, and I don't care how you succeed. Fine. If I wish you all the best. Good luck. But that's not what I'm not talking to those people. I'm talking to people who care about their books, who care about their work. And if you do, make sure that you believe in it. And once you believe in it and you actually approach people in an authentic way, saying, I believe in this and I want to get it to you, just keep at it and it'll work.
Yeah. Wow. That's good advice. Let's see what else I have here. When you're not writing, what do you like to do?
I'm an incredibly boring human being. I live in Regina, Saskatchewan, which is one of the coldest, flattest places on earth. There are no mountains. There are no seas or oceans, and about as far away from that as you can get. So people here like to cross-country ski.
Yeah. Well, what else are you going to do, I guess, right?
Yeah. There's a lot of lakes. So, we fish. My family's actually from a farm originally, so I spend a lot of time out there, and I'm sort of half blue collar, half white collar sort of individual. I can ride tractors, and I can do these sorts of things. So we still have a farm out there, and we still do a bit of that. But other than that, I don't have a lot of time. I've got, as I said, a wife and 2 kids. We've actually have my wife's in-laws live with us, so I've got it's a pretty full house. I like to just drink beer with anybody who wants to talk about life. I do things like this, where you can actually have conversations with people.
Yeah.
I can't stand sort of small talk and shooting the shit. I like to actually talk about things. So yeah, I drink a lot of beer. At the farm, I shoot guns. I guess if I lived in America, you'd think of me as sort of a flyover state redneck. Other than I read too many books, so I don't quite fit the mold there.
Yeah, there's a contradiction there. Well, what kind of beer do you enjoy drinking?
I'm actually, even though I do drink a lot of beer, I'm not a beer.
Not a snob.
Aficionado. I'm not a snob. I don't care if it's a IPA from the coast. No, I don't. I drink whatever. So no, and I shouldn't even say it's just beer. We drink a lot of cheap whiskey where I'm from.
Nice.
Crown Royal is a big drink here.
Yeah.
But I'm too old now. I can't go like I used to. I pay the price, and I don't like paying the price. When you're young, you're stupid and you just do it again. But now a couple of drinks and I'm done.
Yeah, you pay for it now, right?
Yeah.
The next day you're thinking, what did I do that for? Catches up to all of us. In your mind, what makes a good story?
Oof, that's a big question for a storyteller.
Yeah. So what are the key things you look for?
I mean, it's a little bit like the pirate code from Pirates of the Caribbean. It's not so much rules as guidelines. Mm-hmm. Anything you can get away with, it just has to be interesting. However you can make a story interesting. Anything that makes a person sit up and say, whoa, or flip the page. Because even if they hate you, even if they think, that son of a bitch, what happens next? Or whatever you can do to capture somebody's attention and imagination, that's a good story. Yeah. And people want different things at different times. Do you know what I mean? sometimes they want to be horrified, sometimes they want to laugh or cry or whatever. So there's really no, I don't judge genre. I don't judge what people write, what stories they tell. One thing that really annoys me these days is that we have, there's some kind of a strange, I don't know, postmodern belief that everything's sort of got its own merit, and that you can't judge quality. It's just taste. Like you say, oh, this is good, and I say this is good, and it doesn't matter if there's any objective truth. That pisses me off, because there truly is craft.
Yeah.
And anyone who stops and thinks about it for 2 seconds is going to have to admit that. Because, well, let's put it this way. I have a 3-year-old. Do you want to hear my 3-year-old tell you a story? The answer is no, you don't. Because my 3-year-old story goes something like this. Dad, I found a dog and I pet it. That's the whole story.
Yeah.
Now, I think that, I like that story because I remember when she couldn't speak. And so any story that she tells is amazing. But you would be bored very quickly. And a writer can tell you why, right? There's no conflict. There's no, you can go through the long litany of the craft of storytelling that any good storyteller can see in a book or in whatever, in a movie, and if you can't do that, then you're never going to be able to produce a story that somebody really enjoys. So you have to understand how to grab attention, how to get somebody moving from page to page, how to care about characters, even if they don't like them, sort of like a King Joffrey. You may not like King Joffrey, but you want to see how his story ends, and you are praying that it ends in some horrifying fashion. But you care, right?
Yeah, oh, yeah.
So that's difficult to do. I mean, many writers can't do that. So yes, you have to learn the craft of writing, and then you have to bring that craft to something that you really care about. That's certainly the advice I give to any writer. You have to be really interested, whatever it is. Maybe it's a revenge story and you want to get back at your ex-girlfriend, and so you just fictionalize that. I don't care. Make it something that you're passionate about. But before you get to the passion, you do have to learn what you're doing.
Yeah.
And typically, there's many ways to get to that. You can write a lot. That's one way. You can read a lot. But there's all kinds of books on writing. You can read those. The talent, it's largely a myth. I mean, talent is important. I'm not saying it isn't, but practice. It's like anything in life.
Yeah, for sure. Do you find inspiration from other forms of media, like movies or TV or even music? Do you kind of get the juices flowing, the creative juices flowing?
Oh yeah, absolutely. I think writing is sort of one part building up the fuel and the other part sort of letting it out. So you've got to have some process where you're sort of storing up content, and different people do that in different ways. Music is huge for me. I almost always listen to music while I'm writing, and it'll be based on the sort of the mood that I'm going for. So if it's a big battle scene, I'll have something epic playing in the background. If it's a bit more sad, or I try and match the tones. Often certain artists or certain songs will get associated with certain characters, and so whenever I'm doing that character, I'll listen to that. But yeah, I wish I had more time, but definitely I read, I watch movies, I play video games, I try and store up anything I want. But try convincing your wife as you're playing a video game you're actually working.
Yeah, that may not work out so well.
Yeah, it's like, yeah, no, I realize it looks like I'm sitting on the couch for 5 hours watching the Lord of the Rings trilogy, but actually I'm working.
Yeah, it's research.
Absolutely.
Yeah. What games are you playing? Are you playing any video games that you've been?
Oh, what am I playing now? Even though I hate it, and I don't know why I keep playing it, Darkest Dungeon. It's a game I've gone back and forth with. I used to like the MMOs. I don't have time anymore. I wish I did.
Yeah. I used to be. I don't know if I could. I guess I could say I was addicted for a little while to some of the MMOs, and it's scary when you look at the time you've spent. They have that command. It feels like time played or something, and you look at the hours and days you spend in front of.
I wish they didn't have that feature.
Yeah, they should. I don't know whose idea that was to put it in. It was a terrible idea. They should have never done that.
Yeah, you're like, oh look how many hundreds of hours or whatever it is I've wasted in my life.
Yeah, look how many days of my life I've spent looking at this screen and this little person on my screen.
Yeah, but it's
Yeah,
so these days I look for something that's just a bit faster,
yeah,
something that I can load up, play for 45 minutes or something, and then punch out.
yeah. With MMOs, a lot of it was set up. You have to kind of get your gear. So by the time you got to wherever you were going, you were in for 45 minutes just to get to where you wanted to be and prepared, and everyone else ready.
It's a young man's game.
Definitely, yeah.
When you're in university or whatever, when you've got the time.
Yeah, exactly. So this is something I was curious about, and I was kind of surprised to hear different perspectives on this one. But how do you deal with writer's block?
I don't really get writer's block. That's not what stops me. What stops me is undisciplined, lazy, no good personality that in my perfect world, I would be sleeping on a beach with a Mai Tai, my face buried in some woman's breasts. I'm just I'm an addict personality. I just I have terrible sort of unambitious sort of baseline personality where I'm not interested in writing 15 books. Thank you very much. Just leave me alone. So I'm always forcing myself to get more productive, to get up out of bed and do what I got to do and put in the time and all the rest of it. So that's really my issue. The only thing that makes me do this is that I've got some horrifying, dark creature in my brain that won't leave me alone. And, even now sometimes when I jog or I'll work out or something, I can still hear Ruka, so I get a character in my brain like that, and he won't leave me alone. And so that's often what inspires me to get up and, okay, I got to tell this guy's story, because then he'll stop bothering me, and I can go back to being a lazy scoundrel again. Basically.
Do they leave you alone after you tell the story?
No. Sometimes they do. Ruka has not. So his story is not done. And actually, right now I'm writing a book called Dark Sea's End, which will be another series called Beyond Ash and Sand.
Oh, wow.
So I won't explain anything about that because I don't want to do anything spoiler for this current series.
Yeah.
But yes, there's still more to tell in that world for sure. So writer's block, yeah, I think there's different kinds of writers. I think there's one where you've got a lot going on and maybe you've got 10 ideas and it's just you're trying to get to them. Mm-hmm. And then you've got writers who are always trying to get the next idea. I'm the first kind. I've got 10 books that would like to get written. Unfortunately, they only have me to write them. And so we'll see how long it takes for me to do that. But I've definitely got, 10 ideas just waiting in the wings.
Yeah, well, that's good. How do you deal with negative reviews? Is it something that you've had to adjust to reading and to dealing with?
Not so much. I just sort of take them as they come. I know most people say writers have really thin skins. And again, maybe it's because I started later. I was 31 or something, 32 when I started writing. So, I've been through, tough employee evaluations. I've lost jobs. I've suffered triumphs and tragedies in my life. So by the time you get to somebody gave you a mean review on a website, you think, well, who cares?
Yeah.
Though I do take them seriously, I will, especially if the person is given a thoughtful review. Mm-hmm. If somebody says, I didn't like it, I DNF'd it, I hated it, and that's it. I really don't care. That doesn't make any difference to me. But if somebody says, 4 paragraphs, these are the reasons I didn't like it, walks me through it, and I can see that they, have really thought about it, I'll take that on board. I'll think, okay, why did that happen? What is it that person is onto? And I'll really pay attention to that and make adjustments. Really, I've definitely bad reviews are probably more useful than good reviews. Though good reviews are still nice, especially if somebody says specifically what they liked, because you can think, okay, well, how did I do that? I should do that again.
Yeah. Huh, that's interesting. I think part of it is probably that I think, the newer generations are so used to having the internet and, Amazon and social media in their life that I think it's different for us that are a little bit older to remember what it was like before all of this. So I think it's a little different for us. I think maybe I wonder if for the younger generations, if it's harder for them to separate themselves from the negative social media feedback.
I think that's insightful. Yes, I don't envy young people, honestly. To grow up in a world where everything you do is capturable. I mean, I don't know about you, but I was an idiot. You're young. You're young. You don't. Even now, even navigating the world of the internet is difficult for a grown man because you still have to think about, should I say that? What's my mood? What did that person say? Can I just leave it alone? You don't want to make a mistake because it's sort of permanent.
Yeah.
So that's a difficult world for grown-ups to manage. To manage that when you're 15 years old is not only terrifying, but it's actually ludicrous. It's impossible.
I think back to when I was in high school, and we've all had those high school, we dated or whatever, and back then, you stopped dating and it was over, but now you can't get away from any of it. You're always tied to your phone or to Facebook or Twitter or whatever you're on, that you can't ever get away from it. There's no escape. It must be awful. Like you said, I can't.
I think it's awful for grown people. I mean, as they say, I don't own a smartphone, essentially for that reason. Because it's just, I sort of contemplated, am I better with this thing or without it? And essentially made the decision, I'm better without it. Even though I spend, most of my time in front of a computer screen, and I'm sort of an old PC guy. I've been playing games and using computers since the Commodore came out. So I can take this thing apart and I know how it works, and so I understand computers and I use them frequently, but it's much different having a PC that you just walk away from and you say, okay, work is over, time is up, and I'm going to go do something in the real world. And I just feel really sad when I see people on their phones all the time, especially they're sitting at a table with their friends or on dates, or, and they've got their phone out, and I don't know. There's something. Maybe it's like an old man complaining about the youth.
Yeah.
Maybe that's where I am now. But I'm not complaining. I feel bad.
Yeah.
I think this is not. It doesn't seem like it's an improvement in their lives. And I don't know. I don't know what to say about it.
Yeah, and it's funny you mentioned that. I think my first computer was a 486 SX. It was an IBM with 4 megs of RAM.
Sweet.
I was the baddest kid on the block, but I think I was with my 2400 baud modem. I was blazing on some BBS I was on.
Yeah.
But I think back then we viewed computers and technology as a tool.
Mm-hmm.
And you like you said, you can stand up and walk away from it. But now with most people have a smartphone in their pocket, and there's no getting away from it because they're always connected to it. And that's what's scary to me, is there's no escape.
Yeah.
Unless
Now it's still a tool, but it is also a sort of addiction.
Yes.
And so it's not as if they don't still have a tool. They do, and there's so many things that you can do with these smartphones now that are just astounding. When you think about it.
Yeah.
So it's not as if I don't understand, and I don't think they're going away. I mean, there's no way that people are going to give up that kind of power, unless you're a very strange individual like me. But I don't know how you get away from the downsides. Anyway, so it'll be an interesting to see how the next generation handles these problems.
Yeah, it will be for sure. Let's see. So I was curious about this one. Do you model characters after someone you know?
Every writer does, absolutely. Because of course you know people in your personal life the best.
Yeah.
You can know historical figures, you can know fictional characters, and you can do all kinds of wonderful things with that. And you can know yourself, and hopefully you've got some depth in your own personality that you can just pluck out little pieces and throw them into your characters. But of course, yeah, you're going to take pieces of people you know, and don't fuck with a writer, because they will immortalize you in fiction.
Yeah. kind of like a lot of music, musical artists. They'll write about breakups and they'll roast their exes in their music.
Yeah, they're probably even worse.
Yeah, they can get pretty brutal.
Musicians, for whatever reason, their lives are more interesting to people.
Yeah.
And so, people are going to know who their boyfriends and their girlfriends are. So they break up with somebody, and then they write a song about what a piece of crap somebody that they just dated was. And you're like, well, okay.
Yeah, that was fast. If you were to write a spin-off about a side character, which character would it be?
Well, I guess it depends what you mean by side character, but I can make that judgment call myself, I suppose. Well, yeah. I have to say the most amusing character, the sort of, for me, a slight little break in the difficulty of writing this series as a general rule, was Asna.
Yeah.
So he would be a fun side character to write a story about, and to somebody who's not read the book, this is sort of a mercenary, doesn't take life too seriously, murderous, treacherous assassin type of character.
Treacherous is a great way to it. His character reminded me a lot of Joffrey. That's the kind of, because not in their personality really, just with Joffrey you hated him so much and you wanted him to fail, and I felt that same way about Asna.
That's just funny.
He's so awful that you want to be there when he falls, because or you want to be there when he fails, because he's such an and just his attitude, and he's so upfront and in your face about it. But he is treacherous at the same time, and that he can capitalize on these situations, and he just seems to always find a way to kind of weasel out of things.
He's one of those guys you're just waiting for the shoe to drop.
Yeah.
Is he going to stab somebody I like in the back? When is he going to do it?
Yeah. When is he going to do it? And when it's convenient for him, or when he can benefit from it, is kind of what I've been waiting for. But yeah, he's one of those characters. Yeah. I'm sorry?
I said you'll have to see if it happens or not, I guess.
Yeah, I can't wait to find out. If you could sit down and speak with another author and ask them questions, who would it be?
Oh, wow.
Any author.
Any author, alive or dead?
Either one.
Well, these days, it'd be interesting to talk to George Martin. There's no doubt about that.
Yeah.
Just because he does kind of what I do, similar styles, and he's been in the business for so long. And he went from sort of, let's say, decent success to meteoric. But he's truly a craftsman. He's not one of these people who hit the lottery. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
He's one of those guys where his overnight success story took 25 years. Whereas a lot of the other, even like a J.K. Rowling, though I do have a lot of respect for J.K. Rowling, she's not George Martin. She hit it out of the park with her first book. That is not what Martin did. So it would be really interesting to hear what that journey was like. And actually, he was one of my. I didn't even know who he was, but I watched an old TV series called The Outer Limits. I don't know if you remember this.
I do, yeah.
And one of his stories, which was from a short story called The Sand Kings, it's about this, basically a collector who lives on some, it might even be an alien world. I'm not sure if it's Earth or not. I don't think it is. Who gets these huge, or they start out as fairly small, like ants, essentially, like ants in an ant farm.
Yeah.
You remember this?
I do. The actor in it was a brother. Was it? It was. I forget his name.
Yeah, I
he
can't help.
He was a brother. He was some other actor's brother. I think there's a couple of brothers that act. I can't remember his name, but yeah, I remember that episode.
Yeah,
it was like a colony, right?
It was sort of a sci-fi story originally, but the Outer Limits version took it and made it a bit more approachable. They put the guy on Earth, and it wasn't aliens; it was like more of a fantasy thing. So this was like the original George Martin story was actually an alien species. Anyway, so I saw this in the Outer Limits. I saw this Sand King story where these insects they're like intelligent, and they craft these religious artifices, like they have almost relics that they build in the image of their owner, and they treat him like a god. And when he treats them well, they worship him and they think of him as a benevolent god. And then when he treats them poorly, they start to think he's a tyrant god, and they start modeling their own behavior after him to be more evil and nasty. And eventually they break out and kill him and kill everyone. And it's this thing. I was so struck by that story when I watched Outer Limits. I just thought this was amazing. And I didn't even know it was George Martin. And it wasn't until years later that I read in a collection of his short stories, The Sand Kings, and I thought, holy shit, this was him.
I had no idea that was him.
And I looked up into his background, and I realized he'd written all this stuff for TV, and I found all his short stories. And then, even though I knew this all about him, this was before I'd read Game of Thrones, I read about Dunk and Egg, which is this from a story called The Hedge Knight, which was a short story he'd written in the Game of Thrones and the Song of Ice and Fire universe, which again, I was struck by this Dunk and Egg and this Hedge Knight, and this guy goes into this tournament where he stands in for, this, he's not even a real knight, basically, or doesn't belong, but he's an incredible fighter, and he basically wins this tournament, but then he's discovered and he's saved by this other very noble character who turns out to be like, a Targaryen or something, like an Aegon Targaryen, and I didn't know any of the Song of Ice and Fire until I saw that later, and I thought, again, that George Martin, he can tell you a story. He doesn't need all the background. He's a craftsman. He can tell you a good story in any genre, well, just about, with any circumstances, and he can make it interesting. He can make it, blow your mind. He can make you think about it for a week, a month, a year. And that's how you know he's actually a gifted, brilliant writer who's done the work. And most writers cannot do that. Yeah. They may have a one-hit wonder, or they may have one series that appeals to a certain group of people, and it may even be wildly popular and wildly successful, but that's it. They can't do that again. They cannot appeal to more than one group of people, maybe. And George Martin can definitely do it.
I almost feel for him, because I'm not sure. Have you seen all 8 seasons of the TV show?
Yes, I have, and I think I know where it's going.
Yeah, so I almost feel for him, because I think he saw the reaction of the way that it ended, and whether or not that was the direction he wanted to go. I almost feel bad for him that I can't imagine the amount of pressure he has to, number one, finish the story the way he wants to, and number two, the concern he must have to finish it to not get the same reaction that the TV show got. I mean, that must be an awful feeling, and it's like you can't win.
No, he can't. It's a tragedy. It really is. This masterwork that either won't be finished by him, or at all, And he's not the youngest, healthiest individual in the world. So, I'm one of the types that I wouldn't give him shit. I'd be sending him, a diet plan or an exercise regimen. Come on, George, we gotta get you a little more time here, buddy.
Yeah.
But yes, you can understand how it happened because you've got all these actors and you've got all these people who are associated with the show, and so you can't stop them. He's too nice. He's not going to say, nope, you can't finish it. I'm going to be the one to finish it. But to not have the writer be the one to finish that series, it's a tragedy. I cannot imagine. I just cannot imagine. So I understand how it happened, but I have a bad feeling that he may never finish it, just for the reason you've described.
And he gets a lot of grief. I noticed a lot of people are angry with him that he doesn't have a release date, and it's our story. And they I know that a lot of the reaction is because they love the story, but they turn it to anger against him instead of just saying, hey, when it's done, we'll read it.
Aren't people great? Yeah. You son of a bitch for producing something I cared so much about. You've made me this angry. Yeah. It's like, why not just thanks?
Yeah.
Thanks for the previous work. On the other hand, I sympathize.
Yeah.
And, unfinished stories, human beings are not good with unfinished stories. Yeah. We are narrative-based creatures. We want a beginning, a middle, and we want a goddamn ending. And if you don't give people their endings, I mean, you drive them crazy. So I get it. And this was actually a big thing for me when I wrote Ash and Sand. And this is why I always write endings, pretty early into the series, because I know, and I'm like this too, that if I can't stick the landing, if I can't stick the ending, then it's not worth it.
Yeah.
You've really made a promise that you haven't delivered. And even though I truly understand it from the writer's perspective, I get it. It's hard. That is your obligation. I mean, you've made the promise. Deliver on the promise. If you can't deliver on the promise, you probably shouldn't write smaller stories. You know what I mean? If you don't think you can finish a trilogy, don't write a trilogy. It's just not a good idea. Having said that, I know he's a bit more of a pantser. He's a bit more of a he doesn't do that. He doesn't write an ending and then write to it. He sort of just lets it go where it goes. And so I think he just let it get away from him.
Yeah.
That's what happened to him. He put too many irons in the fire. And as masterful as he is at pulling things together and interweaving threads, which is why people love these books. I mean, that is why people love the books. Let's understand that, even though people may not understand it, they love the books because they're so complex. Yeah. Right. So to then turn around and say, "Damn it, George, you've made your book so complex. Why haven't you written them faster?" Guys, he's not making a pop song, all right? Yeah. He's making Beethoven's, Fifth.
Yeah.
And you don't just whip that out in a month or 6 months. It takes a lot of time. Unfortunately, I think his reach may have overextended his grasp. I don't know what the saying is. He bit off more than he could chew.
Yeah.
So it's very depressing for me to say that, because he is definitely one of my sort of fantasy heroes. Mm. But I think that is the case. And I hope he finishes it. I really do.
And I would imagine once the show started gaining all this, because it was this flashpoint, it was this huge cultural, everyone was around the water cooler talking about it after every episode. So I'm sure he had a bunch of people in his ear telling him what he should do or what he shouldn't do, or when is it going to be ready. And that must be overwhelming. Yeah.
You've got the readers on one side. You've got the television people on the other side. I mean, I don't know. There's a real some big writers have talked about the sort of double-edged sword of success, where they get the pressure and they get the just all of the trappings that come with success, And I know, like J.K. Rowling, she produced a like a pseudonym, or a lot of big name writers will produce a pseudonym to write under a different name, basically trying to escape the pressure. And sometimes they do it just for branding reasons, but sometimes it's so that they're almost trying to prove to themselves, can I do this without my name, without that huge fan base, that fame and the success that I've already achieved? Can I actually just produce a book that people would love without all the pressure and without all the
expectations?
Yeah.
Wow.
And unfortunately, I think a lot of them find out they can't. It's kind of sad, but often when they do that, except for some of the very, very good writers, they find that actually they're limited. They don't have the skill to branch out, and that they were quite lucky. A lot of success in life, whether it's fiction or anything else, is just luck.
Mm-hmm.
And it's unfortunate, I guess, but that's reality.
Yeah, one of those things. Right place at the right time.
Yeah.
So before I let you go, I wanted to set aside a little bit of time at the end to ask you some spoiler questions about Kings of Paradise. Okay. So I think you already answered my first question, was about the world, and if you had that in mind before you started the book. I was curious because I think I mentioned in my review that I'm not a big fan of coming of age stories, and I love the journey these characters take. It was really interesting, and I loved seeing the characters grow through the book. Did you take any of your own experiences and use it in the book for what the characters went through?
Yeah, when I was a young guy, I ate a kid, actually. No, not that one.
Okay.
Yeah, it's funny because I don't particularly like coming of age stories either. Yeah, you didn't see that coming, did you?
I didn't see that coming. That was good.
I don't like coming of age stories that much either. But the reason I don't like them, for the most part, is because I can't stand whiny, unpurposeful, is that a word? Characters who just kind of are acted upon and make stupid mistakes.
Yeah.
And, so I don't like all of that. So I don't write characters like that. There's a bit of that with Kale, obviously.
Yeah.
Because, of course, when you're young, you're going to make mistakes and you're going to act childish. But nonetheless, I write purposeful characters that have ambition, or if they don't have ambition, they're not totally incompetent. So I really like to see a character who is competent, act competently, and then still fail, if that makes sense. So it's not that they made some terrible mistake or that they're an idiot. So with coming of age stories, the advantage of them is that you can really get people hooked onto a character early.
Yeah. And
you can get them to understand where that character's coming from. So it was particularly useful with Ruka. And so then I wanted to contrast the two characters. So when I did it with Ruka, I sort of had to do it with Kale, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
So with Ruka's story in particular, and because he's not, I don't think anybody would call him an incompetent or he's not a typical coming of age character that blunders into mistake after mistake. He's sort of a pretty meteoric rise,
Yeah.
And then the question really is, as you're watching his story, that I'm hoping the reader is asking themselves is, why am I okay with this?
Yeah.
He's done these terrible things. Can he still be redeemed? Can he still be, a heroic character? Does what happened to him when he was young justify the decisions he makes when he's older? These kinds of questions. And it's really hard to get that sort of those deeper questions if you don't go pretty far back.
It's funny you mentioned that. Yeah, it's funny you mentioned that because with Ruka, he does all these awful things, and I still didn't hate him.
Right.
And
Yeah.
it was more of just, what are you doing?
Yeah, some people do hate him.
Yeah.
But some people are like, well, when I was first trying to market the book, I was sort of coming up with Team Kale and Team Ruka.
Yeah.
And I would make a joke that it says a lot about, I know a lot about you based on which team you're on.
Yeah.
And there's some truth to that. I mean,
Yeah.
but, for whatever reason, the typical experience, men of a certain age like Ruka more. So it's sort of men who are maybe 30 plus.
Mm-hmm.
They empathize with him, or they understand him, or I'm not sure what's going on there. Well, I have my own sort of beliefs about this, but he is a very, let's call it a masculine character, right? He suffers many of the things that a grown man will understand in terms of trying to find his way in life, being rejected, through different ways, and sort of discovering his own power, and what he does with that. And so I think there are some themes there that capture the attention of particularly men, but men of a certain age, and they tend to be more on Team Ruka, whereas it seems like women tend to be a bit more on Team Kale. That's not always the case, but that seems to be a general rule.
That's interesting. I didn't think of that. It's very interesting. Yeah. And I may be way off base here, but Kale, reading his character, I felt like you had a personal connection with him. Like it was that he's a character that is special to you somehow, because something about him, just you felt like he had meaning to you.
I mean, he's definitely more like me. I think that is fair to say.
Yeah.
But in many ways, he's not too. So, writers always take little pieces of themselves and they put themselves in character. And then, but it's funny when people will say, like, who are you the most like in a story? And I'm like, none of them. I hope I'm not like Ruka. It's funny, especially with bad characters, people think like, oh, is that what he really thinks? No, not. We make villains, okay? Now, but a villain is only good if you can give him a point of view which is empathizable. Again, not a word. You have to understand, or the villain has to have a point.
Right.
And I'm not saying Rook is the villain, by the way, but I'm just saying a good villain, a good gray character, a good anti-hero, he has to have a point of view that makes sense. He has to have a point. So, Ruka will say, well, these priestesses are corrupt. Yes, they are. So it's hard to say, well, he shouldn't be against the priestesses. Well, maybe he should be. On the other hand, and he even admits this at some point in the book, he's saying the priestesses are not responsible for this shithole of a land we live in. Right. It's a frozen wasteland, and no matter how corrupt or not corrupt the government is, we still don't make enough food. We still die every winter. And so you can see that he's struggling with that. He's both hates these priestesses because of his sort of his personal reasons, but he's also objective enough to understand, well, I can't blame the whole world's problems on them.
Yeah, it's a machine.
Yeah. So, but nonetheless, he's got a point. So depending on what he does, you might say, well, what would I have done in his circumstances? If I was faced with these difficult choices, would I just sort of lie down and die? If I did the right thing and I paid the price for that, is that what I should have done? Or do I become a monster and overcome this difficult environment? Whereas Kale's world, he doesn't have to make that choice. It's very nice for him not to be able to have to make that choice. Yeah. So it's from my perspective, if you've got somebody like Kale, and you'll get to this eventually, how do you judge? If you have not had to go through a situation where you had to become a monster, and then you turn around and you look at someone and you say, oh, you monster, you're such a bad, well, how nice for you that you had an island paradise and, fruit and warm clothes, and you're the fourth son of a king. How nice.
Yeah. So when people ask you if you're like Ruka, you don't tell them I once ate a kid. You don't use that. You don't use that line.
I don't use that, but I do like to. I guess maybe this is just me, but I think a lot of writers are like this. There's usually something in us which is a bit. We like to poke, sort of like a comedian. Whatever I can think of to, like whatever your sacred cows are, whatever I think might kind of bother people. I'm always trying to look for that little knob just to turn to get people going a little bit. So I do know much more about cannibalism than any normal person should know, just because I was interested in the topic as this happened. And so I'll tell people things that, like I'm told, I understand that an older person tastes more like long pork, whereas a younger person, tastes a bit different.
Yeah. But that's some interesting conversation there, huh?
I suppose. But, the people I like are the ones who laugh. People who get offended or who get disturbed or whatever, well, I don't know. Maybe they should read a different book.
Yeah. It's funny you mentioned that. There's a book that another YouTube reviewer did a review on a book about cannibalism and the history of it. And so that's a book that's been on my to-read list for a while, but it's an interesting topic for sure.
Yeah, well, it's one of those things that immediately grabs attention. Let's put it that way. Though I have had people say, are you sure you should have led with that? Because there's a certain segment of readers that they'll read that and they'll basically just close the book and like, nope, I'm out. And actually, the book is not as dark as that opening scene. You know what I mean? There are certainly dark pieces of the book, but if you just think the whole book is going to be as sort of nasty as that opening bit, it's not actually. So maybe, so I don't know. I don't know if it was a good idea or a bad idea. The reason I did it was to grab attention and also just to signal, this book's not going to pull punches. So if you need trigger warnings, this probably isn't the book for you.
No, it's not.
Yeah,
that was going to be my next question was if that was on purpose to lead the book off like that, because that you get right away what you're getting yourself into, on the first couple pages.
Yes, so I will say it was on purpose, but was it the right move? Who can say? I did it, so it doesn't really matter.
No, I think it was great. I thought it does grab your attention right away, and what you get into. And I loved it. I thought it was great.
Okay, well, that's good.
Yeah, for sure. When you kill off characters or when you make characters suffer, what is it? Do you grow attached to characters?
Oh yeah,
yeah. So is that difficult to kill them off or to make them suffer?
Killing them is much harder than making them suffer, for sure.
Yeah.
But there is a certain scene in book one
you can say we're a spoiler area, so you can.
Okay,
yeah.
So when Ruka tortures Eagle, that was probably the most difficult scene in that book. Especially because, well, again, if I'm saying, what characters are you most like, or I'm a little bit like Eagle, to be quite honest.
Yeah.
And so I wrote him specifically as a bit of a inserting myself into Ruka's story.
Mm-hmm.
So in some ways, when you're asking, was it hard to torture myself? Yes, it was. No, I'm not obviously that character, but I certainly empathized more with him.
Yeah.
Than I did with Ruka.
And yeah.
Sorry?
I was just gonna say he's just had just by being unlucky, ended up in that situation, running for his life, and he ended up finding Ruka and then going on this journey with him, and now he doesn't seem like he can get away from him. So that's
yes.
Yeah.
Well, but it's not just luck. He was greedy.
Yeah.
He was going to treat Ruka a little bit badly, not terribly badly, but he was certainly going to steal from him.
Yeah.
He was taking advantage of his naivety. So it's important in life to point out where you've gone wrong and where you've made your own mistakes. And so there's no question that Eagle makes his own mistakes. But did he deserve that? I think we can all agree, no, he didn't. And but that's not everybody gets what they deserve in life, and one mistake or he did stumble upon this pretty screwed up child that he did not take seriously, and he paid a pretty terrible price for that. But there are some other scenes in the books to come. There's an even worse.
Oh, nice.
So you'll get there and you'll know exactly what I mean when it happens. But it was also very difficult for me to do.
When Ruka comes back for Eagle and comes into his house, and you got the impression Eagle's just kind of getting on with his life, and he shows up again, and you get this sinking feeling in your gut that he'll never be free of him. He'll always just be there, and he can never get away from him.
That is also the feeling that Eagle has.
Yeah. So that was really well. That was really well done, I thought.
Good. Well, yeah. I mean, there's sort of a relationship there that's quite complicated, and I would say it continues to be complicated.
Yeah.
Throughout the series, and there's a scene. We won't really spoil much for you, but there's a scene with Eagle in the second or third book. I can't even remember now, but somebody else is asking for his opinion on Ruka, and sort of saying something quite negative, let's say, and Eagle sort of comes up with the point that it's not for you to judge, it's for me to judge. I may judge him for what he did to me and for what he is, but that's my sort of right as a victim, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
So as I say, there's a very mixed feeling where he sort of has things that he respects and yet he doesn't forget the past. Neither of them do. I think that's fair to say. But yeah, it's a complicated relationship.
When after the brothers Misha and Shauna take Ruka's food, and Ruka follows them back, and where Dalla is with them, with the brothers, I thought for sure that you were not going to go through it. I thought he's going to team up with them. They're going to reason with him. They're going to end up being a group together. Something's going to happen. There's no way this is going to end. And the way that he kills them was another one of those moments that it just, wow. I mean, I'm glad you did it, because so many times in fantasy, I think we get comfortable and we kind of, someone's going to come in and save them. Someone's going to say something that Ruka will ease off. But he went through with it, in this brutal, violent way.
Yes. Well, and people talk about the violence in the book, and I hope it comes across this way. I don't use violence just for gratuitous violence.
Yeah.
But it's very important to me that violence is shown as horrific as it truly is. It really annoys me when I read fantasy books and, the protagonist dances through the battle in an epic blaze of glory and like cutting down people like they don't matter, and he's not affected by it, and he comes out and it's this wonderful art. How many times have you seen that old art, that trope of, battle being an art? It's not fucking art. Violence is horrific and terrifying and chaotic. And once it starts, you just have no idea where it's going to end. And the fear that engulfs people in all sides of a conflict, even if they're competent, even if they know how to use a sword or a gun, whatever it is. I know a lot of soldiers in my life, and it's just not like you see it in pretty much every fantasy book you've ever read. And I understand, because most fantasy writers have never even been in a fist fight.
Yeah.
Okay. But real violence is horrific, and it affects everybody. it affects the people who cause it, and affects the people who suffer. So I try and take it seriously, and I try and show it in the way that, it's not over quickly. It's not, people take a long time to die, generally speaking. So, you can't go, as I said, I pull my punches. At least that's how I think of it. But I don't want to be flippant, and I don't want to show violence in a way that is not respecting the act. Mm-hmm. And so, particularly if it's a protagonist or if it's an important character that engages in a violent act, I think to do the subject justice. And you see this all the time with sexual violence these days. If somebody wants to display sexual violence, everybody agrees that it should be treated as a very important, well understood. Like, if you're going to do it, you better do it right. Right. Nobody wants to see somebody a victim of sexual violence in a flippant way in modern fiction. You will be castigated immediately by pretty much everyone. And yet, we let people get away with showing violence with extremely sort of shallow ways. And I think, in a way, that sort of violence is more horrific than sexual violence. At least with sexual violence, you survive. I mean, when we're talking about somebody being murdered, surely that's worse. So anyway, that's how I think of it.
It's funny you mention that. When towards the end of the book, when they try to ambush Kale, I forget exactly what he says to himself, but he says something to the effect of, once everything starts in motion, he knows that it's not going to stop. Like, he has this feeling like it's just him, this like loneliness in his gut, that this like hopelessness. He feels that it's life or death. I thought that was the way he described it was really, you got that feeling that there was no turning back. This is going to happen, and I have to fight for my life.
Right. Yeah. Well, you hope that that's what happens to you.
Yeah.
When you get into that sort of situation, you either come to the realization that it's kill or be killed, or you die. Mm-hmm. There's lots of people who get into violent situations who kind of freeze up, who they allow their sort of civilized morality to follow them, where they think this is wrong. And actually, in many wars, like even if we're talking about World War I or World War II, there's been quite a lot of studies of this. Most men shot up or shot down because they were not that interested in killing. So they would be in a difficult combat situation, and they would be intentionally not shooting to kill. It's very difficult to make people kill each other. It's not an easy. It's not a natural trait for people to kill other people. So, it's hard to make a soldier. Let's put it that way.
Yeah. So speaking of, gonna get a little awkward with this one, but I've seen other reviewers comment on this one, but I was curious about it from your perspective, because there's a couple of sex scenes in the book. What was writing those like? Did you have any concerns over those, or did you have someone else read them, or you just kind of went for it?
I just kind of went for it. It's sort of the same thing as the violence, especially if you're doing a coming of age story. Mm-hmm. If this is somebody's first sexual experience, I sort of feel that you owe it to the situation to capture it in a way that's obviously important.
Right.
So, this is a monumental experience in this character's life.
Yeah. And
so to just pass over it like it's nothing, I don't think does the deed justice.
Yeah.
Ultimately. So that's why it got so much attention. Whereas if you're writing a story about a 35-year-old character who's had a dozen sexual experiences, to capture that so explicitly, you're just doing it because you want to. And I'm not even saying that you can't do that. Depending on what kind of book you're writing, if you want to explore whatever, that's totally fine. But I definitely felt that you've got this character. He's a virgin. It's the love of his life. If you don't sort of capture that experience in its totality, or at least almost.
Yeah.
What are you doing? Whereas you're showing so many other things in great detail. I may show a violent scene or a competition, and I'm showing every little detail of that. What is the excuse not to show the sex scene, I guess, is my, other than people's sensibilities saying, ooh, I'm not sure I like that or whatever, but that's, people like it or they don't.
Yeah, I think it for me as a reader, their connection felt stronger after those experiences because of what they've been through. So that you could feel Cale the way he felt for Lani after that, and it made that relationship more, I'll say, interesting. But you realized how important it was to him, and why they had that connection.
Yes, and that's the point exactly. Otherwise, if you skip over it too quickly, then you don't get the full impact. Whenever you're trying to get people to care about a character, the trick is to get them to feel how the character feels. So you've been a 16-year-old boy, or whatever, your first encounter with a girl you cared about. This is, as I say, this is a life-altering, monumental moment in the average person's life. So to treat it without that sort of respect just didn't seem right.
Yeah, no, it worked for the story. It's funny because when now with COVID and everything, my wife had her eyes dilated when I was reading the book. So I went and I was in the parking lot reading the book, and I had the windows down and waited for her to get out of her appointment. And the scene where the king tells Cale he's about to get castrated, I had this reaction, and this woman was walking across and kind of had to stop and look at me. But because you had already set the table and you had already established that you will do these things, I thought he's gonna get castrated and he's gonna be. So I thought it was gonna happen. I'm glad it didn't happen to him. But so
that's also a common experience.
Yeah. So when that happened, it was a shock, but because you had set the rules, I thought, okay, this could happen. And I was worried for him. And most other books or entertainment, you don't really worry about that kind of thing. But because you had already gone there and done these things before, I thought he could be castrated. This might happen.
Yeah. Again, this is why I pay so much homage to a George Martin style writer. This is why you set those stakes. That's why you do the horrifying thing, so that when you put a character in a difficult situation, the reader's thinking, yeah, this could go either way. He could do this.
Yeah.
And it just builds up so much more tension so quickly after that. So it takes time to set up the initial difficulty, and you've got to kind of hurt people a little bit, right, to get them there. Yeah. But once you've done it, once you've hurt somebody, they're tender. They're waiting. They're thinking, oh God, he's going to do it, and then you're more free. Unfortunately, sometimes once you've done that, and this happens to me later in the series, you actually do have to go through with it, even if you don't want to.
Yeah.
And it's a tragedy for the writer as well, I assure you. And I had written a scene later in the series not going through with a certain character, and I had to admit to myself that I just didn't want to do it. So there is one more of those that you can look forward to.
Nice. And I think I was going to ask you about your villains, because the villains were really well done. And Asna, I had written down specifically that he was a great villain.
Who's the villain?
Well, I don't know if you can say the villain, but yeah, exactly. But the thing is, in this world and growing up in this environment, you understand why they are the way they are. You may not agree with them, but you kind of with Ruka, the things that he does, you because of what he's been through and the things that he's had to endure. I don't want to see you understand it, but you kind of sympathize for him. And he becomes kind of like the angel and the devil on your shoulder, with Kale being the angel and Rucker being the devil on the other end of the shoulder. So
Yeah, well, I'll be interested to hear your thoughts, after book 2 and 3.
yeah. So yeah.
Just, there's sort of a journey that happens there in theory, if I've done my job, where, I would agree in the first book, it's pretty clear that, if there's going to be a good guy, it's Kale. And if there's going to be a bad guy, it's Ruka. So there is some play that's going to happen there where, by the end of the second, third book, is that still the case? I don't know. And that's up to the reader. I don't have the answers to some of these questions myself. I just sort of throw it all out there and say, well, let's see what sticks.
Yeah, with Kale, you kind of get the impression that because he's I don't want to say gullible, but there's people who are taking advantage of him, and you wonder who will finally say the right things or do the right things to use him as a tool to get what they want done. With Rucka, he's not that guy. So with Kale, that's what I worry about with him. And
I see. I think that's fairly insightful. Yep, I think that's perfectly reasonable.
Yeah. And I think I have one more question for you about, and you may have already touched on this a little bit, but I noticed that on your bio on social media and on your website, you mentioned that you write fantasy that appeals to adults. Was that important to you to write a book that appeals to adults and not kind of leave it or not pull any punches, I guess? Was that important to you to have that kind of story?
Yeah. I mean, I'm not saying I don't want younger people to read the book by any means. I wouldn't get I guess you could make your own call on this, but I don't think I'd give the book to a 12-year-old.
No.
I don't know what the right age would be, but certainly when I was young, I was reading books that I probably shouldn't have been, or that, if my parents knew I'd been reading them, or they might have been a little scandalized. But so everybody's different at what age they're ready to venture out into a broader world of slightly darker realities. Mm. But I'm not interested in writing for children, basically. Yeah. Or I shouldn't say I'm not interested in it. That's not what I was doing here. I was writing for someone who, back in the day, and maybe things are different now, it used to be that when you wrote a book for someone who was 17 plus, everything was on the table.
Yeah.
That you were not concerned about people being scandalized by the content of a book. I mean, that is the purpose of art, is it not? Mm-hmm. So the world has changed a little bit. And again, I guess I'm an old curmudgeon because the world changed, I don't care. I'm doing it my way, and to hell with it.
Yeah.
So I wanted to write a story that even though it's fantasy, is using lies to tell the truth, that is based on reality, based on real human beings, real events that are perfectly reasonable to have happened in history. And as I say, from that perspective, I still pull my punches. The things that happen in real life would make a normal writer, that if it wasn't me writing King's Paradise, blush. So that's what I'm writing for. I'm trying to write a story that reflects human reality, and then with fantasy thrown in. Mm. So whether, if you want to call that grimdark, if you want to call that, well, that's up to you. But people should read more history books.
Yeah. So now that you mention it, are you working on any books that you don't pull punches? Or do you have any intention to write a book that you just pedal to the metal and go for it?
No, because I don't want people to reach for the Prozac, even though I want it to reflect reality, you have to recognize that your job as a writer is to entertain people. So it's very difficult to go too dark. I would like to learn, for example, my next book is going to be a little bit funnier than these books. There's not, there is some humor in Ash and Sand, but I would say there's not a huge amount. I think that's fair to say.
Yeah, it's fair. Yeah, there are some moments.
Gallows humor usually when it happens. So I'm trying to use a bit more humor now. I'm trying to do what I can to lighten the darkness that I want to use because stories contrast is always best. It's sort of like you're worried about Kale's testicles. Well, to get you there, I've got to employ darkness, right?
Yeah.
So if you're going to employ that kind of darkness, I don't want to depress people. I don't want people to come out of an experience reading a book sad. That's not what I'm doing. So I've got to be able to give them a bit of light and a bit of dark, and you got to mix that in appropriate amounts. So I'm actually writing 2 books right now. The one is basically it's this Beyond Ash and Sand. It's in the same world as these stories, and the other is almost like a lit RPG. Which is sort of like half game, half book. It's not really fair to say that. I would say it's more like mostly book with just a tiny bit of game element. And it's, I don't know how to describe it, but essentially it's the story of a guy descending down into this dark dungeon. I don't know if you ever played Diablo.
Yeah.
It has a bit of thematic inspiration from that. And it's going to be a bit more fun, more jokes. So I'm going to be changing up the genre. I'm going to try and do stuff like that. And then I'm going to come back to the Ash and Sand series. Beyond Ash and Sand is the next series. So I'm going to just sort of take a break. I'm going to go back and forth, do another Beyond Ash and Sand book, do something a bit lighter, a bit fun, and then swap back and forth.
It's funny you mentioned about how anything that's happened in any book or in your books or most other books, it's not anything near as horrible as what's happened in history. There's a comic book called Crossed. I don't know if it's a horror comic book written by Garth Ennis. And it's basically this virus that these people end up getting, and they do these horrific things. And because it's a comic book, there's visuals, and I would probably call it an extreme horror book because he really goes for it. But at the end of the book, there's a quote at the end of the book that he says, they're for all the bad that they've done, these people who are infected, someone in history has done worse. So it kind of what, when you made that comment about that, reminded me of that book and made you think about, yeah, he's right, because I've seen all these horrific things that these people can do, but in history, even now, people that are on the planet right now were probably responsible for worse. So it puts into perspective. Yes. Well, most people's knowledge of history sort of begins at kind of World War I, or maybe slightly into colonialism of Europe or from Europe. But there's thousands of years of history before that. And we don't know as much as we do about modern history, obviously, but we know enough. And even when we think about today, when we think of some of the terrible places in the world that still exist and some of the things that happen, ultimately, if you have any kind of functioning civilization that has some rules, that has some hierarchy, things are better than they could be. Yeah. Because there are places and moments in history where there just are no rules. I mean, the rules are whatever you can do. And where the people who run the place are just the biggest murderers, the strongest killers in the land. And so even when we get to medieval history, and that's usually covered by fantasy quite a lot, that is thousands of years, huge amount of technology, and a huge amount of social technology away from what things could be. Yeah. Which is hard for modern people to grasp, because, as I say, we have so many walls, we have so many layers of civilization, from just the religion to the incredible sophistication it takes to get to our economic systems, to get to our democracy. We have no concept, or most people have no concept of what it took, the blood that it took to get the building blocks
that allow us to live our lives in these unbelievably safe bubbles where we can put our heads down at night feeling safe.
Yeah.
I mean, that is just in itself. And, all you have to do is think of nature. Anything that's not a human being doesn't have that luxury other than our pets, essentially. Yeah. So I realize that people don't understand all of that. And so I have to pull my punches, as I say, because you can't, people can't grasp the sort of the deadly nature of reality all at once. But I guess I feel some compulsion to try and to share some of that, ultimately, because what I want for readers is gratitude. I want them to be happy. I want them to realize how wonderful our world is, that they don't live in the land of ash, that they don't have to make the choices that Ruka has to make, and to compare and contrast that versus their own existence, so that they can just be so thankful for their own lives and for their own cultures and civilizations wherever they might live. If you are reading this book, you are lucky. You're a very fortunate individual, because you can speak English or you can read English, and you've got the time to read this book. So be grateful, enjoy life, because it could get much worse. And here is a tiny little depiction of some characters that have to experience it.
Yeah. Well said. Yeah. So it's already been over 2 hours. I didn't realize how long it's been, but I'll go and let you go. Yeah. But I will go and let you go. Where can people find you? Where can people find your work?
Well, if they just Google my name, they'll find my website. That's always easy. But I'm on, they can buy the books on Amazon. I'm on Twitter. I'm on Facebook. I'm on Goodreads. I'm on Reddit. That's not a very useful place to actually communicate one-on-one. But anyway, not hard to find me. Just look me up on the interwebs, you young fellas.
Yeah.
And Steve, I appreciate the time. I appreciate the interview. It's always fun.
Yeah, it was a blast. And I also wanted to ask you, when I finish the trilogy, we're talking about doing a group read. We have a forum that we communicate on. Would you be willing to have a quick discussion with us about the trilogy when we finish it?
Sure, happy to.
Awesome, cool. Well, I will keep in touch with you on that, and we'll schedule something.
Sounds good. Awesome.
Well, thanks again. I didn't mean to take up so much of your afternoon, but I appreciate you taking the time and just to talk to some random guy on YouTube. So I appreciate it. It's been a great conversation.
I'm also some random guy on YouTube, so it works out.
Yeah. Okay. Awesome. Well, hope you have a great rest of your weekend.
Yeah. Bye-bye.
Okay. Bye-bye.